Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is an upcoming action RPG and a remaster of the 2007 game that was originally released back on the PlayStation Portable. Many people enjoyed the original game in the past, and now that PSPs are no longer available, the original game has become harder to obtain for a lot of people. So it's a game that many people haven't had a chance to experience for themselves. However, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion will be available on PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One and Xbox Series S and X, Nintendo Switch and PC via Steam. This new version of Crisis Core comes with a lot of enhancements that take advantage of the newer platforms it will be available on, like an upgrade to Unreal Engine 4 and a complete graphics overhaul. In this video, all of the gameplay shown of the Crisis Core remaster will be from the PC version of the game. The controller inputs shown on screen may seem like they're from console, but depending on the controller being used, these inputs can change to match the platform-specific buttons used on the official controllers. I've only tested this with DualShock 4 and Xbox Series controllers, so other input styles may vary depending on the controller used. I prefer to use controllers when playing action games on PC, but the mouse and keyboard controls function well and they are fine to use for people that prefer those controls. Button inputs can be customized on both the controller and keyboard and mouse control schemes, and it's possible to use the mouse cursor to navigate menus and make selections when necessary. I didn't have any performance issues during the time I was playing, but that's always something that can change from person to person depending on their spec. I played the game at 1440p at 120 frames per second, but there are a few options that you can adjust in order to find the best settings for your own PC. And even though it was mentioned that Crisis Core's game data will be encrypted, Square Enix has mentioned that it won't be using de novo. I'll put my PC specifications and the settings I use while playing the game in the description, so you'll have something to refer back to if necessary. I already love the original game, so when Square Enix asked me if they could sponsor this video so they could specifically show you what the PC version of the remaster looked like, I was more than happy to. But to avoid spoilers, all the gameplay and information in this video will be based on the first 3 chapters of the game, which is pretty much the beginning of the story. There will still be enough for me to show you though, so you can still get a good idea of what Crisis Core is like. Crisis Core tells the story of the energetic protagonist Zack Fair as he works his way up the ranks of Soldier, the Shinra Corporation's security and military force. On the surface, Shinra presents themselves as an electric power company that wants to enrich people's lives with their Mako energy, but we learn early on that they're up to much more behind the scenes. Crisis Core is a prequel that begins 7 years before the events of Final Fantasy VII, and it's through Zack that we get to view how Shinra operates from the inside. We also get to learn more about the various low and high-ranking soldiers within the company, and other characters within Shinra's multiple departments. Characters from Final Fantasy VII also make an appearance, and we get to learn more about what they were like in the past. The story in Crisis Core is divided into chapters, and from what I've played so far, the story generally focuses on one main objective that kept moving me forward until the chapter's conclusion. The game begins with Zack being sent on a mission to help locate a soldier named Genesis that went missing on a mission in Wutai, a country that is currently at war with Shinra. The story takes Zack through various locations within the world, and while I was playing through the story, for the most part I had to fight my way through multiple enemies as I made my way from one story objective to the next, which usually resulted in a boss battle towards the end of the chapter. There were a few small mini-games within these story chapters that were most likely included to add some additional variety, but for the most part the story chapters that I played were fairly linear. After each of the chapters, I was given a chance to explore the hub areas that I had access to before continuing with the story. These areas contain various items that I could collect, characters that I could speak to in order to learn more about the current situation or additional details about the world, and I could also begin sub-events. Sub-events are indicated by an orange interaction marker. These events usually lead to more than just a conversation, and often revolve around helping people with their requests. Sub-events can have objectives that lead to equipment rewards upon completion, but it's also possible for the conversations that take place within sub-events to provide information that lead towards unlocking new missions. These sub-events can also be present while playing through the chapters of the story, and can be easily missed if you go too far ahead without interacting with the event. So it's worth opening the map when entering a new area just to see if there are any sub-events nearby. Along with the main story and sub-events, there are also many additional missions that can be done. The mission portion of the game follows a trend that was fairly common on the PSP and is geared towards being able to easily pick up and play the game for short sessions. Missions can be started while at a save point, and each mission has their own difficulty rating, objectives, and rewards that can be obtained upon completion. New missions can be unlocked by reaching certain chapters in the story, by completing other missions, or by finding specific sub-events. But there are also missions that can be unlocked by fulfilling specific conditions while in other missions. Missions start off fairly simple, but eventually they will put you up against various combinations of enemies and bosses that can be much stronger than what you'd usually expect to fight at your level. In order to take down some of these enemies, you'll need to discover and take advantage of their weaknesses. Some enemy weaknesses are obvious and are displayed as an element down icon next to the enemy's name. Using an attack that matches the element that is displayed on the icon will deal additional damage to the enemy. But there are some enemies that don't have an icon that clearly indicates their weakness, so you'll need to experiment with different materia and accessory loadouts in order to find the right combination that works best for a particular enemy. The enemies inside of missions can drop new equipment and items, and you can find treasure chests that contain useful materia and accessories that can be used to customize Zack. The level design in missions is pretty basic though, and for the most part areas will look pretty empty since only the mission target and treasure chests will be displayed on the field. Other enemies are there, but they only appear when you run through specific locations, which are usually in the middle of large open areas. Just like in the original game, you can skip most battles and rush straight for the treasure chest and boss at the end just by hugging the walls. This won't help you in the long run since you'll actually need to take part in battles to get stronger, and the bosses that you have to beat at the end of missions will be more of a challenge if you continuously avoid fighting. But it was a bit strange to see how easy it was to pretty much avoid everything in most missions, especially when the updated controls and camera make it easier to do than in the PSP version. The main story tends to have more structure and forces you to take part in a lot of battles, so this seems to be something that is mainly present in missions. The mission mode is where a good chunk of the content for the game will be, and there will be a lot of missions to take on if you're up for the challenge. But I did notice that when I focused on the missions for too long, it was pretty easy for me to outscale the story content once I decided to progress. But the new combat system is pretty entertaining, and since you're frequently rewarded with new abilities and magic, it was easy for me to get sidetracked when I continuously went back into missions to test them out. The updated combat system still retains all of the core elements that were present in the original game, but the updated controls and pacing of the combat make it feel much more intense than it did in the original. Input-wise, the combat system is fairly simple. Repeatedly pressing the attack button will perform Zack's basic combo, and when pressing the guard or dodge button, Zack can block or avoid enemy attacks. It's also possible to equip Zack with materia that can provide him with additional stat boosts and new abilities and magic that can be used in combat. Materia are divided into different categories. Magic materia can provide Zack with magic that can be used to deal damage to enemies, recover health, gain supportive buffs, or debuff enemies. Using magic consumes MP, but it is useful for dealing elemental damage to enemies, and it's also good to use when you're in situations where you need to keep your distance or if you need to hit enemies that are out of range of melee attacks. Commands materia will let Zack access special attacks and abilities that have a variety of effects. Some are for close range physical damage, some will let Zack leap towards distant enemies, some can be used to inflict a variety of status effects or elemental damage, and there are even a few that have special traits like being able to steal items from enemies. Using command abilities consumes AP, but in some situations it can consume Zack's health. But the power of command materia can be increased when you use them at the end of a normal attack combo, which will be indicated by the orange damage numbers when successful. Special materia can provide Zack with additional stat boosts, or they can modify existing abilities like converting the guard button into a mid-combat dash. And support materia have abilities that can modify existing materia, or provide useful bonuses to Zack, like giving him the ability to view additional enemy stats. You can place materia into one of the available slots, and once in battle, materia can be activated by pressing its assigned button. To start off with, Zack will have 4 materia slots and 2 accessory slots available, but eventually this will increase to 6 materia slots and 4 accessory slots. So you'll need to find a good balance between active and passive materia and the accessories that will enhance your build. But it is possible to save multiple loadouts, so you can use different setups depending on the situation. Materia can also be combined by using materia fusion, which can be used to transfer stat bonuses or create completely new higher tier materia with more powerful effects. Both Zack and his materia can be leveled up during combat to increase their effectiveness, but this isn't done in the way that you would usually expect. Leveling and a few other key components of the combat system are determined by one of Crisis Core's unique systems called DMW. The Digital Mind Wave System, or DMW for short, is a slot reel that will automatically spin and stop on randomly selected images and numbers. When the reel stops and all the images match, a limit break is obtained based on the image that was shown. Limit breaks are powerful abilities that can deal a large amount of damage to enemies or provide Zack with additional buffs. Limit breaks can be saved and added to a stock that can then be used when necessary by pressing the limit break button. When the numbers match, various other enhancements are provided based on the numbers that were shown. These enhancements can provide buffs like invincibility, or give Zack unlimited MP or AP for a set period of time. After earning a specific amount of experience points, Zack will level up when certain numbers align. And under certain conditions during battle, the materia he has equipped can also level up. After obtaining specific items or completing certain objectives, the DMW can randomly switch to 2 additional modes during battle, which are the Summon mode and the Chocobo mode. In Summon mode, all images in the DMW will change to images of summons. If they match when the reel stops, then you can call the selected summon for assistance during battle. Summons are the embodiment of legendary entities that have been condensed down into materia. Summons can deal a lot of damage that can ignore certain enemy defenses or even cause instant death. When in Chocobo mode, the usual DMW images will change into Chocobo mode images, and if they match, Zack will get some unique beneficial effects, like being able to obtain equipment much earlier than you'd usually be able to get them. The DMW can provide Zack with a lot of additional bonuses that can give him a huge advantage, but certain enemies have a few special abilities of their own. When an ability is activated, the enemy will enter a casting phase, and its ability gauge will be displayed. If you continuously attack the enemy while it's casting, it will lower the gauge and reduce the power of the enemy's ability once it finishes casting. If you can completely reduce the gauge to 0 before the enemy finishes casting, it will cancel the ability completely. It's a good idea to cancel abilities when you can, since certain enemy abilities can be pretty powerful, especially if you are fighting an enemy above your level. The combat system is very flashy, but mechanically it is pretty basic. There are a lot of things that can happen during combat, but the DMW takes a lot of the control out of your hands and simply randomizes it, so you have to take advantage of the results as they happen. This can be things like unlimited MP or AP for certain periods of time, but that encourages a spammy or button mashy playstyle, where you just spam the same ability or magic over and over again until the bonus runs out. Early on, the benefits that come from the DMW can usually be ignored, but eventually enemies can easily overwhelm you and can inflict some powerful status effects if you don't avoid or block their attacks. These status effects can be as simple as a poison, but others can stun you and leave you open to follow-up attacks, or some status effects can just straight up cause instant death. Since there are so many ways for you to actually die during battles, it does make the gameplay more chaotic, since you need to actually evade enemies that just want you dead. So when you're in a battle where having unlimited MP could get you out of a life or death situation, it does make for some intense and satisfying outcomes. So surprisingly, the spammy nature of the combat system hasn't worn thin yet, but that could change as I get further into the game. It's been a few years since I played the original Crisis Core, but it does feel like the new combat system allows you to get away with brute forcing your way through enemies more than it did in the original. Battles can be pretty challenging as you go through the missions, but it does feel like outside of the major boss fights, you can get away with chipping away at enemies with hit and run tactics. Even with the limited amount of time I had to play the game, I was still able to make it to the 7-star mission against Bahamut Fury before reaching the end of Chapter 3. But I assume that this is not the ideal or intended way to play, since it leads to enemies being able to easily stun lock and kill you almost instantly. But the game is actually fun to play, and I'm glad that they've left the progression in missions open-ended, so people that want to push themselves and test how far they can get have the option of doing so, even if they're fairly early into the story. It's been a long time since I played the original Crisis Core, and apart from a few major things that happen in the story, I've forgotten about most of the things that happen. So it does feel like I'm playing through the game for the first time again. But based on just going through the first 3 chapters, I'm not too sure that I could recommend this game to newcomers that are looking to get into Final Fantasy VII for the first time. If you're not someone that's already familiar with Final Fantasy VII and its setting, then a lot of what's going to happen in the story may just go over your head. So it might be worth playing the original Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy VII Remake before starting Crisis Core. There are more gameplay systems in the game that I couldn't talk about since they become available as you get further into the story. So even if you've watched the video, there are still more things to discover for yourselves. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion will be releasing on December 13th, 2022. So if you're interested in the game, then you won't have to wait long until you have a chance to try it for yourself. I will be making some new videos for other upcoming action RPGs from Square Enix, one of which I've already teased on Twitter and on my YouTube community tab. So be sure to subscribe and enable notifications if you want to be the first to know when that video is available. I will be making some new videos very soon, but until I make those videos, I'll see you all later.